Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. You might have heard the saying, "Nothing about us without us." This expression has its origins in Central European political traditions and became popular in disability activism during the 1990s. According to the United Nations, it relies on the principle of full participation, and it's been used by disabled people's organizations throughout the years as part of the global movement to equalize opportunities for, by, and with persons with disabilities. In today's episode, you'll hear about how nothing about us without us can be applied in special education settings. This Global Autism Community roundtable discussion was led by Michael Gilberg, an autistic special education and disability rights attorney based in New York and Connecticut. Other participants were Autistic Self-Advocates Sara Bradford, Corben Havener, Mary Johnston, Jonathan Gardner, and Sara van Koningsveld, as well as fellow community members Nancy Gardner, Colleen Dorsey, TJ Larum, and Danielle Terrell. Among other things, we discuss what is special education, social emotional learning, the difference between an individualized education program and a 504, how attorneys and advocates can support parents, and the importance of including students at school meetings about them. In this episode, discover what's possible when the student has a seat at the table. And now I present you the Global Autism Community.
My name is Michael Gilberg. I'm a self-advocate and special education attorney. I represent families in special education who are in dispute with their school districts regarding their child's educational placement, a lot of autistic children, other disabilities as well. I just, for example, had a case this morning where they were talking about the child might be medically autistic, but not educationally autistic. It's a whole longer conversation that I won't go into now.
I'm Mary Johnston, and I run the blog Autistic Rainbow, where I talk about my life on the spectrum and try to offer tips and tricks to autism parents or like autistic people themselves if they didn't know about certain things or maybe they just got diagnosed.
Hi, I'm Sara Bradford, or SJ Childs, a host of the SJ Childs Show, where I also interview and highlight neurodiverse individuals, lots of experts, a lot of friends, which Michael has been on the show, and I probably a couple other people here and other people from the community. I'm a self-advocate and just trying to spread as much good words and education. I love this topic today, so excited to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Colleen Dorsey. I am a special education teacher, and I also am a Skill Corps team member where I've traveled with the Global Autism Project. I'm super excited to be here, and this topic is very much my jam.
My name is Danielle Terrell. I'm also a Skill Corps alum, traveled to India last year. Now I am behind the scenes in social media with GAP and the podcast. I'm also a transition specialist, so very excited to be here. I currently work with 17 to 22-year-olds, and I've worked in elementary school and in middle school in the past, so I'm very excited for this discussion.
I'm Sara van Koningsveld, she, her. I am a licensed professional clinical counselor and a board-certified dance movement therapist. I am an adult diagnosed autistic in my late 30s, so I spent what you could deem about half of what my living life would be not knowing I'm autistic. I've been a therapist mostly with children and families for over 15 years, so I've worked with many neurodivergent folks as young as the age of 5, and my specialty areas are actually young and transitioning aged adults, so similar age group to you, Danielle. And I am going to be on the Skill Corps trip in July, a week after my 40th birthday.
I am Corben Havener. I am a self-advocate living in Indiana. I just completed a school year where I was a special education assistant at my neighborhood middle school, but I also, through just some of my attempts to transition full-time into teaching, I got hired by an Indianapolis school district where I'm also being trained in Montessori, and I'm actually going to be starting next school year a Montessori teacher covering the grade equivalents of 1 through 3.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Gardner. I'm a cancer survivor who was traumatized at a young age in the public school system. I am part of Mass Advocates for Children, where we try to advocate for children's rights in schools. And this is my mom, who is my support person.
Hi, everybody. I'm TJ Larum, BCBA Regional Director for a autism therapy in-home support. And I'm also a PhD candidate at Simmons in behavior analysis. And I am, as always, pumped to be here. So excited for the conversation, everyone. Thank you.
So why don't we get started? Just so everyone knows, special education, and for those watching, is designed as specialized instruction for students with disabilities. Just because a student has a disability doesn't mean that they're necessarily entitled to specialized instruction. It's does the disability affect their educational setting? And I don't want this to just be me lecturing, but I'm going to give some overview. One important topic people don't realize is a lot of people misunderstand that as meaning just academics. It also, and this comes in with a lot of kids on the spectrum, to social emotional learning. Children who can do well academically but struggle emotionally or with social skills are entitled under the law to learn appropriate social skills as under the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the federal law. You have to learn both academically and socially, because you can be the smartest person, as I always say, and you don't know how to deal with people, you're not getting very far in this world. I've had clients who are very successful academically and don't know how to talk to people or how to be appropriate. So that's the first thing. Does anybody want to talk about the differences between an IEP and a 504?
My understanding of an IEP versus a 504, an IEP is specialized instruction where the curriculum can be modified as well as you can receive accommodations, where 504 is more so just accommodations. An IEP, you also have more of a designated disability, where a 504 could just be major life events that are impacted.
That's a very good overview. Anyone else have any thoughts?
As a licensed therapist, I'm often on the 504 plan as part of the mental and emotional support or social skill building. So I've worked predominantly with community mental health agencies that are contracted with LA County School District, LAUSD.
So you've worked with LA, which is, along with New York City, the 2 largest school districts in the nation.
Yes. And so the mental health agencies I've worked for become the mental health contractors for IEP support. So I will sit in the IEP meetings, or I no longer am in that role, but I have sat in IEP meetings. I've been the advocate for the student for mental and social skills support. I've worked with the psychologist evaluating the testing results and seeing what types of accommodations we want to put into the IEP for mental and social support. I've advocated for additional psychological testing for older students that maybe were misdiagnosed and needing to be evaluated for at higher psychological levels for neurodivergent tendencies and behaviors. And then that has also allowed me in the clinic to advocate with psychiatry as well. So working across teams. So I've never actually written the IEP, but I've been there for the kids as much as I can.
Well, and I think Sara touches on a very important issue that in big school districts like LA or New York City, things are very different than in the smaller suburban districts where there's a more intimate knowledge of the student. You know the people involved. I work in New York and Connecticut, and I always say New York has 2 systems, New York City and everything else. In New York City, I call the opposing school board attorney. I try to negotiate with him. In New York City, I almost always have to file some sort of demand and let it go through a million layers of bureaucracy before I can get an answer. It just gets laid up in bureaucracy. So what Sara's doing, where they bring her, you said it's a clinic you work for, Sara?
Yeah, I worked for LA County Department of Mental Health contracted clinics. So
you were a county employee. You weren't working for the school district directly.
I worked for an agency contracted by the county because the system is so big. The county doesn't have enough therapists. They hire
that
agencies.
Happens in big districts. That does not happen in smaller districts where they'll say they have their own people on staff. Sarah's experience in LA is something that's more unique to bigger, large metropolitan school districts like that, big cities.
Yeah.
Anybody have any other thoughts on IEPs versus 504s?
So, I mean, I am only going to chime in because I only have experience with IEPs and not 504s, and only from a parent standpoint and not from an educator or any other standpoint. So I guess it's good to give the whole big picture. And, I have been in several different schools, online school, brick and mortar school. So I can definitely have the different experience levels of how those have gone. We actually had the most fantastic experience through our online school where all of our kids' needs were met, their tutoring, their speech, all kinds of great stuff. And then we went into the brick and mortar, it got a little bit trickier. We found a lot of issues with maybe non-compliance of things, goals that we had set, or we would have to constantly rewrite and, have emergency meetings. And this year was kind of my toughest year in the last, I guess it's been 12 years now that I've been having IEP meetings. So it's a long time. But yeah, this year was my 6th grader was the hardest year yet. We had lots of difficulties. Unfortunately, I've had to file a state complaint after the fact. So yeah, that's Michael and I will have to discuss that another time. But
it's been a whole other thing we'll discuss. But
it's been really tricky. But I think that the most important thing I've learned as a parent, so if there's any parents listening, the most important thing I've learned is to go in as a team member and to go in and just, even bring something for everybody, a little thing of donuts or something to kind of just make everyone feel at ease. And you want everyone to work together. And I think that building kind of that relationship with the team members you have is so important. Obviously, that doesn't work for all of them. And if you already start having problems, that's what takes precedence. But it was the most important thing for me. And I found that 97% of all of my meetings went just fantastic. We always had things worked on and goals measured. And so, yeah, that's my advice for parents is go into it with team building in mind.
I just wanted to say something quick about Sara. She mentioned emergency meetings, and I just wanted to point out that if you are a parent listening or you're an advocate or a family member, you can call for meetings anytime that is needed. And I think something that is a big gap in the system is the rights of parents and advocates and guardians aren't taught to people. So, that is something that you can do.
I am going to say something, and I apologize to anyone who's worked for a school district because I know Colleen has. School districts benefit from parent ignorance, and they don't tell parents their rights because it's not in their interest to do so. So that is a very important point that Danielle's making, because parents often don't know their rights. If I had $1 for every parent who said, I didn't know I could do that, I'd be very wealthy. So that's an important point. School districts benefit from that. And then TJ, you wanted to say something?
This isn't necessarily even a clinician perspective, but more or less an observation when drawing a line IEP 504. I'm thankful I haven't spent a whole lot of time miring myself in the bureaucracy that is schools. I'm happy I can keep that at arm's length. Hats off to you, Colleen. And thank you again for that comment there, Michael. I find myself interacting a fair amount with IEPs and sometimes reluctantly invited to IEP meetings to help inform those processes and again, advocate for appropriate accommodations, least restrictive environments, what have you. Seldom do I have learners that come to me without an IEP. And if there isn't an IEP, I find myself typically advocating for a 504. So that's just kind of the dichotomy from my perspective or observation is either I'm working with an active IEP team, or I find that the learner may have fewer support needs though I think it's incredibly important for there to be some semblance of a safety net, i.e. the 504 in a school for should there ever be a mental health crisis, any other crisis in someone's life. So that's just kind of been my observations, perspectives, what have you.
Okay, Jonathan?
So on the topic of IEP specifically, since funny enough, I just had my last one, so today. So when that was brought up, I kind of chuckled to
That
myself.
must mean you're young. That means you're a baby if you're that young that you can still.
21 actually, but
yeah, that's a baby to me.
But yeah, though for my experience of it, thanks to a very helpful mother, my IPs have been run by myself and by my vision. So that's all I can really add to this. So.
Can I say, I just love that, Jonathan, and your mom, and I don't know your mom's name. So Jonathan's mom, I'm so proud of you guys, because as I am also going through that process. I have one child that isn't maybe verbal enough to be in his IEPs or not understanding what that might mean, but I do have one that is, and I'm trying to make sure she is always included, always understanding the rights and accommodations that she needs to fight for herself for. Hopefully sometimes it's just asking for, not having to fight. So thank you guys so much for, showing up like that.
I just wanted to piggyback off of Jonathan, and I believe you said you were from Massachusetts. I'm a special education teacher in Massachusetts, and this can be something I can share later on depending on how the questions go, but I would love to speak to Massachusetts is actually working on a new IEP document to make it more family and student driven. And I have already stepped up to make all my students be able to be part of IEP meetings as young as I work with 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. But I'd love to speak more about how we can make the students more of a focus, because I agree they should all have a seat at the table, no matter what age or ability.
Thank you, Colleen. And we'll get to that in a second. So what I always say is give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish. You've all heard the phrase. An IEP is teaching him to fish. A 504 is giving him a fish. A 504 is an accommodation, but there's no goals to improve on the behaviors that need to be worked on. There's no measurable goals. An IEP is giving you measurable goals to say, so-and-so will achieve this by this point. And for things that need to be worked on, and look, nobody needs to have their autism fixed, but there are goals we all have to work on. Social goals, emotional goals. As I always say, the 504 was great for the girl I represented with a peanut allergy, because there was nothing we could do to teach her not to be allergic to peanuts. We couldn't set a goal. Sally will not be allergic to peanuts and have an anaphylactic shock because she's around peanuts. Not medically possible. She needed a 504 to not be exposed. But children on the spectrum most often need those goals. And I always need an IEP because they need goals, whether it's social, communication, emotional regulation. Again, not to change their autism, but to help them be able to function. If the child is melting down constantly, or the child is saying things that offend other people, or the child is not able to communicate, those are areas of goals. We don't want to just accommodate the child. We want to teach him how to be successful. A 504 only gives you the ability to accommodate now, but it doesn't give you the ability to teach him how to be successful later. If the 504 says, oh, we're going to allow this child to say inappropriate, offensive things, but we're not going to teach him what is an appropriate thing to say instead, are you really helping him long term? And again, it's not about fixing the autism, but there are things we all need to say. I had a client once, and I always use this as a hypothetical till I got the real case. Kid was on the spectrum, a teenager, a student, but he was trying to commit suicide within the school, and it was caught on video. And that was an example where it was all social emotional. There couldn't be a 504 for that. You need an IEP. They needed to teach him how coping skills. I get kids who hit their teachers, and you can't just use a 504 and say, well, we'll accommodate him by not punishing him for hitting us. They have to teach appropriate replacement behaviors. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to my definition of that or thoughts on what I just said.
I suppose just a comment on something you had said, and I liked it because we're not trying to fix anything. I do think there's a list of skills that are just certainly good for surviving in today's day and age in general, like being able to identify signs that we want to make sure that we are incorporating, just to make sure that everyone is safe to live their best possible life. So I just like what you had mentioned, saying like actually choosing educative targets that are meaningful, makes sense to everyone's livelihood, and then like really kind of leaning into those so everyone has the ability to be in like their least restrictive, living their best life, X, Y, and Z.
So we've just discussed it a little, but let's move on to participation in the IEP and 504, well, mostly IEP special ed process. People were just talking about how Jonathan went to his last IEP meeting and Sara talked about having her children be part of the meeting. And there's a lot of going on of discussion about this, about should the child be in the meeting. I've heard attorneys and advocates who say, well, we don't want the child there or the student because they're not always children because it's too traumatizing for them. And I'm a big believer that when possible, as you've all said, the student should be part of their process, especially as they get older. Most states mandate by the time you're 14 or 15, the student must be invited. It should probably be a little younger, but most states, the mandate is at age 14 or 15. I've heard of students as young as 7 or 8 going to their meeting. When you get to the younger end, 6, 7, 8, there's a little more, I think, debate about the appropriateness. But by the time the child's 11 or 12, they should be aware of their education and involved in the process. And as I said, I've had parents who don't want their child there. I once had a mother who did want her son there and he didn't want to be there. And it ended very badly with him cursing out the special ed director, saying he wasn't disabled. But more times, that's the exception rather than the rule. I've had students who come to their meeting. I once had a girl on the spectrum, 17, who described how she felt in a way that neither her mother or I could, about how she felt emotionally. And it was so beautiful. And then good, she was 17. She was at the higher end of the spectrum. It was easy, but her presence there was essential. And I think very often I have found at least some colleagues don't want to hear from the student. And in many cases, the school doesn't want the student there. They don't want to hear from the student because very often the student will say something that doesn't go along with what their plan is. And Corben.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, to me, it's definitely very essential that, I was at my IEP meetings. For example, going back to at least middle school, probably farther back than that, but, I always sat in on them. One thing that I remember is though I always performed well academically, I always put a lot more pressure and weight to a bunch of academic situations. So there was the state test, which at the time was called I-STEP, and I remember not getting that completed within the time limit, and then I was able to add that in, and I was always assured that the pressure of a time limit would not be a factor in me best demonstrating my knowledge or mastery of a subject. But another reason why I always felt like it was important is it is a point of self-advocacy. And as I mentioned in the communities, self-advocacy was so important because it helped me, and I believe it helps students understand why they might need a modification or an accommodation, and why is it in place, what is it for, and understanding that they are still able to live up to a reasonable and rigorous academic expectation. And another reason why self-advocacy was important is because, I ended up going on to college. And of course, K through 12, you do have your IEP. And, you do have those meetings, you do have your assigned teacher of record. But once you get into college, there is a disabilities office, but because you're an adult, that becomes your responsibility as a student. You have to go in there, you have to visit the student, get the letters, get them out to your professors, and you could have a tutor recommended, but if you're not going to the tutor, nobody's going to make you do that. So learning the self-advocacy skills that come with sitting in your own IEP meetings, those set you up for success in the post-secondary.
Right. And college is a little beyond what I think we're going to discuss today, because college is not part of special education, especially since the rule law is every person in America is entitled by law to a K to 12 public education. You are not entitled by law to a college education. So not everybody goes to college. Not everybody's capable of college. So college is not a legal entitlement the way a K to 12 education is. That's why the laws are different, and you're not guaranteed, you don't get the same level of services or protections. Anybody else have anything to say about student participation? Sara, you have your hand up.
I think it's a really great question that you brought up, and why would you bring a child, or why wouldn't you? Like I said, I've had hundreds, it feels like, of meetings with my kiddos, but in this last school year, I brought my daughter to every single one of her academic meetings, except for one of the very last ones, which was a social emotional goal, because the school was bad mouthing her, in better lack of terms. And I wasn't going to let them demean her and let her feel, that she was being looked at in a bad light. So I thought that in that sense, I had to protect her and not let her attend that meeting in particular. And then, I just went forward. I brought an attorney with me to that meeting instead of her. And so I think they got a better message than I would have if I would have brought her with me.
But it's unfortunate you felt that you couldn't bring her.
Yeah, it is. It is unfortunate. So,
and we'll go to the others, but just quickly to answer what Sara said about when is not a good idea. If the student's just going to come in and start cursing and insulting the teachers and the staff, then you probably don't want to bring them to the IEP meeting. And like I said, I've had that experience with clients.
Hello, Rachel here. Would you like to share your own perspectives by participating in roundtables like this one? Join our online Global Autism Community, a safe and judgment-free space where all kinds of people connected to autism regularly discuss important topics like autistic identity, dating on the spectrum, coping strategies, and many, many more. We'd love to see you over at community.globalautismproject.org. And now, back to the roundtable.
With that, let's go to the other Sara, then Colleen, then Jonathan.
It actually ties really well to what you were saying, Sara. That would be part of my role that I often found as the therapist, is working with the parent and the child to determine what parts of the IEP meetings maybe were the most safe and supportive, and making sure to create the space. And I think, Michael, you said the youngest one you remember is like 7 or 8. I had like a 6-year-old. I've been with really little kids in their IEPs, and, because a 5, 6, 7-year-old doesn't have the attention span, it was also recognizing that, right? And inviting them to the spaces where they could tolerate to be sitting there and a part of adult conversation and advocating for themselves.
They don't have the language to understand everything being discussed.
Right, exactly. And that would be the other piece is, part of my work as a therapist and a support to the student would also be helping them to identify what they wanted to discuss, what felt most relevant, and not only making sure that that language in some way was captured in the documents, but it was also them being able to speak in their own words in the group and in the space to say, I don't like that, and even if it's that simple of a language, because that is where they are developmentally, I don't like when this happens. Great. Now the whole room knows. It's not me speaking on your behalf. It's not your parent speaking for you, but you get to speak for yourself. And so I think, what you were saying, Corben, that it's really important as young as possible to just have that opportunity to learn the skill, because it is part of the social emotional skill building. And as a therapist, I found that super important to advocate for as well. So I think all of my students had at least 10 minutes that they were able to be there and share.
Great. Thanks, Sara. Colleen?
Sara, that's so amazing. Thank you for sharing. I started teaching 12 years ago as a middle school teacher. So I worked with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And that's usually around anywhere from 11 to 14, depending. And when I had my first 8th grader have an IEP meeting and was told that he was 14 and was to attend, I started to get curious around why not until they're 14, right? And that was obviously the law or whatever at the time. But one of the switches that we're making is that everyone attends no matter what their age is. And something I did back in middle school for the 14-year-olds and up is I had them create a slideshow, whether it was just some simple pictures or they were able to put full sentences, whatever their abilities were. And it was just a great way to kick off the meeting for them to have their voice. A lot of people on the team may never have actually even met the child or seen the child. So it was really cool for them to see them and to see what they're capable of. And then now in my elementary setting with the younger kids, my district was one of the ones chosen to kind of trial the new IEP, and I was sent to the training. And instead of waiting for like the official green light to do all the new things or apply the new things, I took it upon myself to find a way right away for my students to have a voice at the meeting. And I made them visuals where they could choose and circle or dab or select and just have, again, a voice. And I think it's really important for them to come to the meeting to kick it off, to again, kind of have that moment to shine and use that to support them. So I am a huge advocate of having all students, all ages, all abilities to be a part of that meeting. So this is a really great topic.
Thank you. Sorry about the outside. Thank you, Colleen. And that's very interesting about the new IEP, especially because in New York, we don't have that where any student should attend the IEP. Most states, as Colleen said, were 14 or 15. Jonathan?
So I guess my opinion on this whole thing is that the student should be at the IEP because simply it's, in, I guess, my case, my IEP, not my mom's or my teacher's. It's all about, well, me. But when I was traumatized, I could not attend my meetings for 2 years because of my PTSD. So my mom would bring pictures of me and videos so I would still be present to show the team that I was the one that should be discussed and my education is my right. But ultimately, my own opinion about this is it should be the kids' choice to participate or not because, well, at the end of the day, it is theirs, but also they could be dealing with a lot more stuff like I was.
Yeah, and I just want to say, too, that, Jonathan does, up until today was his last day, so it was great. But he did do presentations and like almost social stories. We would make social stories like how he can live his best life, like what's important to him, and I would bring those. And sometimes he would come at the beginning when he started coming. He was really young. Like I started him right away. Like he actually came to the very first team meeting with early intervention in school when we met. And he stayed for maybe a minute and a half before my husband took him home. So we always like kind of had like an out for him, a place for him to go. Sometimes his brother would drive him home. His father would drive him home, but just so that they could see him and make it real. Like I just felt it really to be important.
It's very important to have children be part of their own IEP, as we just said. It's a huge deal, and it's something that schools don't do a great job with. Given the work I do, how familiar are many of you with hiring an attorney and when a parent needs an attorney or an advocate? Jonathan's mother? Sorry, I didn't know your name, so.
Oh, that's okay. I'm Nancy, but I am referred to as Jonathan's mother, as Danielle knows. So we're very familiar with hiring an attorney. Jonathan was 8 and he was physically abused by a teacher at school. So we worked with the Disability Law Center, and we have many lawyer friends now, and he helped change the law in Massachusetts on restraints and seclusions. So we're very familiar with the whole attorney process, and I have to say we're so thankful for the champions that come to the table with us, because even though it's Jonathan's voice that should have been heard back in the day, they can bring it to the table much louder than sometimes we can.
And that's a huge issue, restraint and seclusion nationwide. And the laws are obviously different from state to state. And so, it's good that you did that. And Colleen?
I love this, Michael. And I actually thought about reaching out to you a couple times this year because I'm in a situation now where previously where I used to work, there was a lot of support, a lot of resources, a lot of knowledge. A lot of my families came with advocates and whatnot. And then now that I'm at a public school, there's a lot of like this school versus parent type of thing. And not everyone's like a team and working together. And that was so like mind blowing to me because I thought we're all here for the students. And I had to help give the message and remind people that parents have the right to bring an advocate. They have a right to bring an attorney because we're all here for the same purpose, to do what's best for the student. And I also just had a thought, Michael, and I don't know if you could speak to this or any of the parents that have been to IEP meetings. What is the difference between if you bring an advocate versus an attorney? Is the advocate always an attorney, or is it just someone that can help speak on the parent's behalf?
Well, and I'll answer that in a minute, but that's important what you just said, Colleen, because very often it's different from district to district. And I'm only in New York and Connecticut, although I've thought about waving into Massachusetts because there's a lack of attorneys in the western part of the state. Everybody's around Boston, and I believe you're closer to New York.
Yes, that's also been a big shock for me as I was in the central part of the state and now I'm back in Western, and it's fascinating.
You're probably closer to me than you are to Boston.
Yeah.
You're closer to me than you are to Boston out there. So, and that's the problem in a lot of these states where there's the attorneys and advocates all congregate around the big cities. And if you're in a different part of the state, it's less. Like in Massachusetts, everyone's around Boston and the western part gets forgotten. I know people in Illinois, but they're all in the Chicago area. If you're in Southern Illinois, there's nothing. You know, it's when you have this one city that dominates the state that I have found that's the issue. Sara mentioned California and LA before. California is different because there's so many big cities and it's so big that it doesn't have, LA as big as it is, doesn't dominate. There's enough with San Francisco and San Diego. But the question Colleen asked about attorney versus an advocate is this. An attorney is licensed. You have to take the bar exam. You have to go to law school. You have to be admitted to the state bar. Anybody can call themselves an advocate. There's no legal regulation. I've had people who say, I'm an advocate who have no experience. So they're great advocates, but the point is an advocate is a title that anybody can use. That's why we say self-advocate. Anybody can use the title. There's no requirement on it. The thing about using an advocate is it is less confrontational. When you bring an advocate, it doesn't change who the school district has to bring. But if the parents bring their attorney, the school district has to bring their attorney and has to be notified. The only time I go to meetings with a parent where there's not an attorney for the other side is New York City, because again, it's so different. They don't bring an attorney. The parent says, I'm bringing my attorney. They're like, that's fine because it's New York City. But that's an exception rather than a rule. Everywhere in Connecticut and everywhere in New York outside the city, I think I've only ever been to one meeting where the school district was like, that's fine. We don't need our attorney. We're going to agree to everything anyways. So, you get those cases once in a blue moon where the school district is so amenable, they're going to settle and they don't need their attorney. But 9 times out of 10, they're going to have their attorney and there's going to be some confrontation. Even if the attorneys say nothing, we have to be there just to have our presence known. And now that we're doing a lot, I've done almost all my IEP meetings on Zoom since COVID. And even that, which allows me to represent people in further upstate New York that are farther away, it hasn't necessarily trickled into these areas where there's all over where there's less representation. I have personally found there's an opportunity for me in upstate New York because there's not as many attorneys. And if I'm doing it virtually, I can represent somebody in upstate New York just as easily as someone in the next town over from me. And honestly, I think depending on the district and depending on these attorneys, it can be helpful or it can be confrontational when you ask about how does it affect it. I think it depends. There are special school board attorneys I work really well with, and when we're there together, we find a solution and we break through the problems with the parents and the school district. On the other hand, there are school board attorneys who I do not have a good relationship with, and it's very confrontational. There's one attorney in particular. He has called me an asshole on the record. In a transcript, he has threatened to hit me. He has made fun of my autism. I will no longer communicate with him by phone, only in writing, because he's lied about a number of things. So I want to have a paper trail with him. I don't trust him. He and I in the meeting is not always the greatest thing, but he's usually pretty quiet in the meeting. He's more abusive privately or in hearings. But So I think it depends on the relationship of the attorneys. And there are some school board attorneys I get along with, my colleagues on the parent side don't, and there are some that I can't stand that other parent attorneys like. This guy's universally disliked. He's a very consistent that way. But I think it really depends. I think an advocate can be less confrontational, but an advocate is just basically like, there's somebody who has knowledge and generally knows more than the parents if they're the right advocate. But again, it has no legal bearing. And if you end up having to sue the district, you need an attorney. Some places will let an advocate do a due process hearing, but there's a lot of ethical issues about that, because the question is, if somebody's an advocate and not an attorney, are they practicing law without a license?
Michael, can you speak to, or anyone else, for someone who may be interested in becoming a special ed advocate or learning more, since things are different from state to be an advocate, is there a special training that you can go through? Do you see advocates crossing state lines?
So while attorneys are licensed by state, I can practice in New York or Connecticut. I can't practice anywhere else. Colleen calls me, like she said, I can give Colleen advice off the record, privately, personally. I can't go to a meeting for a student up there legally. I'm not licensed in Massachusetts yet. It's still something I'm thinking about. What you asked Danielle about advocates, though, advocates, because there's no requirement to call yourself an advocate, you can practice in any state. The thing is, again, anybody can hang out a shingle and say, I'm an advocate. I once heard about a client I represented, and the mother decided later she'd be an advocate. And everybody was like, oh no, this woman can't be an advocate. And it was one of those mothers who now thinks she could be an advocate and couldn't. Most advocates are good, but you like anything that's not regulated, you're going to get people out there who shouldn't be in the field. But in terms of being a licensed advocate, there's no licensure, but the best thing to prove you're a real advocate is, I'm on the board of COPA, the Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, which is the only special ed professional organization for attorneys and advocates in special ed. And we have a training called SEAT, S-E-A-T, like sitting in a seat, that most advocates go through who want to be considered like real advocates. And so you can find that on the website of COPA, COPAA.org. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about it to answer questions. I know it exists. I know everybody loves it. I've never been involved in it, so I can only pass along the information.
I have a question for the self-advocates here. I guess thinking back on your own educational experience, what are maybe some things that you felt helped you succeed? And maybe what are some things that you would maybe change for other autistic people in the future? Mary, go ahead.
I'll say, one of the biggest things that I found helpful was helpers in the classroom to help with classes that were hard for me. But I took a mix of both special ed courses and gen ed courses. But some of the gen ed courses, having I guess the right term is aide or paraprofessional, was really beneficial. I also thought power walks, if you got stressed, you could just take 5 minutes, just take a walk, I thought was really good. The one thing that I didn't like was when I was in middle school, and it might just be a my district thing, the helpers would follow you around all day. And it really kind of felt a little, I guess, kind of personal. And I think if they're at the level where they can't independently walk alone, it's one thing. But if they're able to, it starts feeling a little embarrassing once you get to middle school level and high school levels. So I would definitely change that.
Mm-hmm. And that's not something I think is specific to, without knowing all the facts, Mary, I can't tell you. They're not supposed to do that. And we worry about stigma with that in schools. Mm-hmm. It depends on the age and it depends on the child's ability to be independent.
Yeah. And, just to mention that, I worked as a middle school, paraprofessional special education assistant. And one of the things that was known is one of the things that the principal would talk about is not only making sure the needs are met, but also minimizing harm, which occasionally that harm could be the stigma. So a lot of times our role being in a classroom was we just offer assistance to anybody who in that moment needed assistance most of the time. And in that case, we had that extra body in the room. But it wasn't a heavily like advertised thing. I ended up getting a strong relationship with a whole bunch of students. In fact, we just had the last day at school, and I think as my years in education roll by, maybe we'll hit differently, but that last day of school is emotional because I feel like I'm missing my students right now.
Okay, thanks, Corben. Anyone else? Jonathan?
I guess what worked best for me, and I do think it would work best for everyone, is letting the student in particular be the guide, because that's who you're teaching. That's how you best understand them. Sure, it might be a weird, wacky way of doing things. Like, for example, let's say you have to do Mario math, or Superman reading, or Cookie Monster something. I don't know. I'm just thinking off top of what's in my background to use as an example. But student interest focused based, because at that point, it, for some reason that I cannot understand for the life of me still to this day, just helps engage us more into the lesson. It's very important because at the end of the day, it's the student you're specifically teaching that should be the focus. And sure, it might be a weird, wacky way, but at the end of the day, it's a way. And from what I've learned through my cancer journey, it doesn't matter how the information gets through to a person, as long as the information does get to it. And I do believe that also applies to this.
It's the I in IEP, individualized.
Danielle, you just stole my phrase. I say that all the time. People forget the I in IEP for individualized. Danielle and I apparently are thinking the same.
We need to make that a t-shirt and send it to the group.
No, well, it is a real phrase I use, the I in IEP. People forget that the I is for individualized. Colleen?
After I went to the training about the new IEP, I was asked to do a professional development for my whole school. And I was like, not just special ed, like regular ed teachers should come as well. And that was like my biggest thing I was trying to get across, is it's individualized. And like, I hate to even like admit this, but I work with professionals that like copy and paste like the same accommodations. And it's like, yes, some might be similar and some might be classroom based, but like you have to look through and make sure it's really individualized to that student. It's like sad how it's not always remembered.
Right. They want people to fit into these buckets, because here's the bottom line, and I'm sure you all know this. Individualizing things costs more money than saying we can give this program for 5, 10, 15 students. But making everything so individualized costs money, and school districts, unfortunately, don't want to spend money. So they try to come up with a way to put 10 or 15 special ed students in a class together. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's what's done.
And that's when the teachers get burnt out and lose their passion, because that is what I'm experiencing this year for the first time ever.
And that's the problem. The teachers like Colleen, we lose the Colleens for the world. And the teacher, they go to other things. And the teachers who are willing to go along and get along are the ones who stay in the public schools. And a lot of times public school teachers, we know this, get threatened. You're going to do what we say if you want to keep your job. And that's an ugly reality of the system we're living in. And I will also add to that the other problem is that I've had schools where they say, well, the autistic child should learn to be normal. Why can't he be normal? Why can't he just be like everyone else? Anybody want to add any thoughts on that?
I just want to say that I don't think anyone should be like anyone else, because we're all individual human beings, whether you have a disability or not. And Jonathan has a brother. They're both different. And I just think that that's great, right? And, you know, growing up, Jonathan has different learning styles. His brain works differently, and that's okay. And I think the more people that can accept that everybody does things differently. I don't get up in the morning and have the same routine as all of you, and you don't get up in the morning and have the same routine as me, and that is okay. We should all be able to live our best lives in the way that supports us.
And I like to second that, because regardless of disability or anything like that, these are kids. Regardless if for whatever goes up on here, we're all human beings.
Yep.
Regardless of that, we're all different, regardless of disability or not.
And I think sometimes when you're sitting at an IEP meeting, it is, I think Colleen had mentioned, it's the them against you. they sit you, they're sitting on one side and you're sitting on the other. And throughout the years, Jonathan was like, I don't like that lady, doesn't make me feel good. That guy, he got rid of the SPED director, always wanted to come to our meeting because of our circumstances. And he's like, Mama, I don't like him being there. And I said, well, let's write a letter and get rid of him. So
I'm sorry, who did you want to get rid of?
The SPED director being at his meeting.
That's usually very hard to do.
No, it really isn't, because it's Jonathan's meeting and he gets to decide who he wants on his team. And
my mom's a really great advocate.
But that was what Jonathan's wishes were. And for Jonathan to be able to attend his IEP meeting is much more important than the special ed director attending it. And so I'm
impressed, because I've had parents say, I don't want the director involved with my kid's case anymore. And the school's like, well, he or she's in charge of the department.
And that's fine. He can be in charge of the department. That is his job, but he was not in charge of Jonathan's IEP. Jonathan was, up until when it ended.
Yeah, I think that speaks to, keep advocating, keep fighting. And, it's your meeting, and for your advocates and your support system that know you the best, keep speaking up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, kudos to you guys.
Client recently said to the director, I'd like you not to be involved in my son's case. The director's response was, she's like, no, I'm the director. It's my job. I'm not stepping aside. This director has a particular ability. This woman has an ability to fight with parents like no director I've seen. Corben, you want to add something?
Oh, yeah. I think it really comes down to the team. I have worked in the middle school in the largest public school district in Indiana. And there are some dynamics that come down to like people working together. So some things that I've understood, being a son of a special education teacher, is sometimes the dynamic between general education and special education and those teachers is not always the most smooth, but we also have other teachers that work great together. But this is all very nuanced problems, and these are all problems that it's everybody's role to improve upon as we move along, because, I'm working in public schools and like urban environments, and, if I have my way, I will continue working in there because, I believe this is the vessel that serves the most people. This is what's in everybody's neighborhood. If we lose focus on that, then there's that danger of more and more people falling behind. So just the, public education environment, using our just collective experiences to make it the best it can be, is a fight worth having because of that. And sometimes fight is a tough word. I think maybe a drive worth having.
Because waiting for you to finish. Thanks. My last words were continue to go fight the school districts. Change comes from within. And remember, as somebody said, it is always the child's IEP or the student. I keep saying child because to me, somebody Jonathan's age is a child, but I realize 21 is an adult. But always remember, it's, as you said, it's the student's IEP. And, we have to change the system and remind schools no child should be discarded.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. Are you a self-advocate willing to share your story and educate others? Or a professional seeking to hear directly from autistic voices and improve your practice? Or are you a family member hoping to support and empower your loved one? Whatever your connection to autism is, we'd love to hear your takeaways from this episode in our online Global Autism Community, where hundreds of people from all over the world come together to support each other and know that they're not alone. Join us today at community.globalautismproject.org. Let's work together to transform how the world relates to autism. Thanks for listening. Take care.